Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I have a pretty fun video to tackle here today. This is exciting. I don't know if anybody else has put these three side by side on YouTube yet. This is my Protech Malibu Reverse Tanto, and these other two knives belong to my buddy Matt, who is on Instagram as CuttingEdgeGear. I will link to him down below so that you can check that out. And then he also happens to work at Protech. He does some pretty cool things over there. I think he just works there part-time right now because he's a student as well. But super nice guy, one of the most knowledgeable guys, especially for his age, that I have met in the EDC community. And really glad to call him a friend and appreciate him lending me this gear. So show him some support. Check him out in the link down below on his Instagram. Anyway, these are all three of Protech's button lock flippers that they've produced up to now. I genuinely hope that there's more. I really do, because these are three excellent knives. I just yesterday published, the day before that, I filmed my full review of the Malibu. Now the Malibu has very quickly become one of my favorite knives, period. It's just an absolutely excellent EDC offering. And before I had the Malibu, I also had a Mordax. The Mordax I had didn't look like this one. It was OD green, and it had the milled aluminum scales. This one is just the flat scales, which, it's funny, I had never held this one before I got the milled one, and I thought the milled one looked a lot cooler. I still do think it looks cooler, the milled one. It's just a really cool design, and I'm not usually into that. But anyway, the milled one is noticeably lighter, having a pretty solid memory of how that one felt in hand. This one is noticeably heavier, being the solid handles, but these ergos are undoubtedly better. They aren't bad on the milled one. I didn't have a problem with them. You can watch my review on that knife, and you'll see that I was fine with those ergos. But these are more comfortable. It's just a... Yeah, if I were getting another Mordax, I would get this handle configuration. This one is actually a really cool color too. It's, I think they call this light gray or silver, I'm not sure, but it has like this slightly bluish hue. I don't know if that'll come through on the camera for you guys, but I really like this setup. It just looks great, especially with this gray kind of stone-washed color hardware and clip. It's an excellent knife. I really liked my Mordax, but if you watch my review of this, you'll know I sold that Mordax because I knew that the Malibu was coming, and I wanted a Malibu and didn't necessarily feel like I needed both. And as this video will, I think, prove, they're different enough knives that now I think I could have both, and I wouldn't feel like too much overlap is happening. Anyway, next is the actual first button lock flipper that Protech made. This is the Cambria. And the Cambria is a knife that I saw a number of times but never really gave much attention to. I actually had a buddy who picked one of these up in a really nice version. I feel like he had like a wood inlay on his, and it had like a mosaic pin on the button. It was just a really gorgeous knife in the spec that he got, and I always saw them and thought they looked nice, but I've never personally been a big fan of like overly kind of swooping lines on a knife, like the amount of curve on this handle, and then that the blade has kind of belly to almost match that curve in the opposite direction. It just has a bit of like a Persian style vibe, and that's never really been my cup of tea on knives. But it's interesting now that I have held this one in a saber grip, that form feels really, really good. As you can see, this one is actually a limited one. It says Cambria Limited, production run 1, number 77 of 200. So this one is all blacked out, and it looks stealthy in this configuration with all black everything. I quite like it. So it's been interesting for me to play with the three of these knives side by side, because they all essentially have the exact same mechanism, right? These button lock manual flippers are becoming, I think, kind of a mainstay for Protech. They're having a lot of success with the button lock flippers. But I don't think I'm alone in not really knowing what was going on with the Cambria, because the Cambria, I think, is not even being made anymore. I'm pretty sure this knife is a couple years old now, and it's no longer even in production. So it's interesting to me that I have fallen in love with Protech's manual button lock knives, and there was one that existed for a long time, and it didn't get my attention, and I don't think it got many people's attention. And it probably should have. What I will say, however, is the sensation I get when I'm flipping this one compared to the Mordax and the Malibu is it's not as crisp. It's still crisp. And if you've played with either of these knives, you'll know exactly what I mean when I say crisp for a button lock manual flipper, because usually manual button locks are not crisp from what I have experienced and what I've heard from other people who've played with more than I have. You just tend to get some inherent mushiness with a button lock when it's not an automatic. And this one is, I would not call it mushy at all. In fact, if I had this one first, I'd probably have been like, wow, this is really crisp. But now that I've experienced the others, the contrast is pretty stark. So on the Mordax, it's noticeably more crisp than it was on the Cambria. Let me see if I can get this all in frame. This is the biggest one of the bunch. And the way it breaks, it's a cleaner snap when you push past that. I probably should know whether it's an actual detent in there, or I'm just going to keep believing it's wizardry and magic inside of this knife. But it's a very clean, crisp break when you push past that kind of wall of resistance, and then the blade just flies open. And what's great too about all of these is the way that they can just free swing when you're holding that button shut. So if you want to open the knife just by pressing the button, it's going to work on any of these. Press the button, give it a little wrist, send it out, and it's excellent in that way. But what's cool, the coolest to me, is both my Mordax and this Mordax, the action field felt about the same. Did I just say field? They felt about the same, whether you're in a field or not. Now, the Malibu feels even more crispy than the Mordax to me. And I think what's happening is a couple of things. I think A, Protech is constantly refining internally, and they're mastering this, and if they can get it better than this, I don't know possibly what that'll feel like, because it already feels so good on here. But I think Protech is probably just they're refining a little bit, because it's like generations here, and these generations are happening quickly. This is a span of just a handful of years here, but this one, it is by far the crispiest of these three when I play with it. It's just, oh, it's so good. Now, I think in addition to Protech kind of enhancing what they're doing here, I think if I had to guess, it also has to do with the geometry at play here, pivot placement, flipper placement, and the size and weight of the blade. And then also, when flipping a knife, things need to be considered, like, where does your hand go? Where are you holding on this knife to keep it secure when you're playing with the action? And the ergos on this one, for me, are the best of the three. If you haven't watched my full review of this one, please do, because it's genuinely one of my favorite knives, period. It's just excellent in so many ways. But the action is one of its absolutely shining features. So it's really cool for me to have the three of these lined up here, and to be able to feel, like I said, kind of the generations of what's happening at Protech. And the cool thing is, every one of these knives is also pretty different. Like, the only thing they really share at the end of the day is that they're flippers with the same lock type. But the designs of these knives are all pretty radically different, which makes sense. The Cambria is a Protech design, but it's one of their more different designs. I don't see a lot of knives coming from Protech that are this angled, and it's different, right? And then the Mordax is a knife that's not designed by Protech. It's built by Protech, and it uses Protech's lock, but this is a Ferrum Forge design knife. This is Ferrum Forge's lines, and all of this shape is not Protech. It's just built by and assembled, and it's made by Protech, which makes it feel like a Protech, but the design isn't their internal design. And then here again, we get to a Protech internal design. And this, to me, feels and looks the most like the rest of what I've seen from Protech, whether it be their push button out the side autos. I guess all the manuals are here, so they're push button out the side autos. But this feels, and to me, more like it fits with Protech's identity, whereas the Cambria was a little bit of like a kind of a flared, it was a little bit less common in their lineup, and this feels like Protech took a knife that could have been a phenomenal seller for them, an amazing new model as an out the side auto, and instead they did us all a favor and they made it a manual, which in my opinion made it better. Now the interesting thing is I live in California, where it's largely illegal to carry autos. I can own many autos and have them in my house. I'm just not supposed to leave with them in my pocket. Whether that happens or not, I will remain silent on. But the autos that I've had from Protech have all been phenomenal. And I've had automatic knives from other manufacturers beyond Protech, and whether they're out the sides, whether they're out the fronts, autos are inherently fun. They have some cool factor to them, and they're enjoyable. And I've had a couple out the side autos from Protech. In fact, I have another one on the way right now. But personally, with how well done these button locks are and being manual, I prefer these to their automatic knives. And you may disagree, but if you've held and played with these, you'll probably at least understand where I'm coming from. Because to me, an automatic knife is a lot of fun for a few minutes. And I like having them. I enjoy them. They're fun. There's a cool factor to having an automatic knife, right? To pressing that button and just feeling it fly out, or flipping the switch and it flies out. Or there's some coolness to that. And I think the teenager in all of us loves that kind of stuff, right? But deployment is only half of an action. And the other half is closing a knife. And to me, I have never enjoyed, on a single action, out the side auto, having to press the button, push it to like here, so that it's just past the lock but doesn't have enough spring tension to close all the way yet, and then I've got to muscle it all the way here, and it's just awkward to manipulate one-handed. Sometimes instead of doing that, I'll like press it up against my leg or something hard and push that way so I can just use one hand, and that works and it's fine. But the reality is I prefer having a knife that has an action that's fun in both directions. And I don't feel like I'm missing out on any of the fun of an out the side auto by having this manual, because this action is so phenomenally good that it's not any less fun to me than pressing a button and having a spring do all the work. It's excellent on there. And it's the same on all three of these. Every single one of these knives, I would not take them in an automatic over a manual. And in fact, I hope that the success that's coming from this model and this model, this one I frankly don't think was that successful, if I'm being honest in my perception of it, but if these continue to be largely successful, especially the Malibu being an internal design that's coming straight from Protech. This knife has 3 names on it, right? It's Protech Drop, So you've got Protech's symbol over here. Let me open this to make it make more sense. Protech right there. On this side, we have Drop, who it was sold by, and then on the frame we have Ferrum Forge Design. This is a 3-entity knife, and you can only buy it from Drop. And in some ways that's a cool thing, but this knife you can get at all the major retailers who carry Protech. You can buy it straight from Protech, from what I understand. If this knife does well, which it already absolutely is, as of when I'm filming this, it's like a mad dash for people to get these reverse Tantos, and the Warnies have been gone for a long time. They're production knives. They're going to keep making more, but there's demand for these, and there's hype behind them, and it's justified hype. I think this is the beginning of a really, really good thing for Protech and for the knife world, to have a lock type that's not new. Button locks are not new at all. And I don't know if Protech invented it or if someone else did. I don't know the history behind the lock mechanism, but I know there's actually quite a few of them. If you really look, you can find some button locks out there. But I have never experienced one that is dialed like these are. And genuinely, I prefer them to automatic knives. And so it's cool to see Protech, who I think most people perceive as being an automatic knife company, getting to a product like this. It's really exciting to me. So I guess the point of this video also is just to demonstrate that there's a lineage here. Because I think a lot of people who are hearing about the Malibu now, because the Malibu's getting some real hype, or maybe they heard about the Mordax because the Mordax got quite a bit of hype and a lot of YouTubers were talking about it, and you can see it on Instagram and all that. I think it's important for people to understand that that wasn't where Protech entered this arena. It started here. We have the Cambria to thank for the Mordax and for the Malibu. So the fact that we've gotten here, we owe some gratitude to this knife. And what's interesting too is I don't want to say I can tell you the future or anything like that, because I can't. But I imagine that the more hype there gets behind the other button lock manual flippers from Protech, the more these are going to become sought after. So take that for what you will. I imagine, especially since they're not making these anymore, I don't know if that means they'll never make them anymore or what, but I'm pretty sure it's discontinued. I imagine demand is going to rise and secondary prices are going to rise, and people are going to catch on to the fact that this knife exists, that it's been here all along, right under our noses for many of us, and it was very good. Yeah, I mean, essentially all of the things that I can say that I loved about the Malibu, that I raved about it in my full review, carry over to this knife. The action isn't quite as crispy. If I'm being totally honest, it's not quite as crispy, but it still has an awesome pocket clip, which is machined to perfection to be perfectly flush underneath. It's still got a great action. It still has fantastic ergos, better than I ever assumed they were before holding one. It's got a great edge profile. It's a little bit more robust in the blade, and it's kind of a saber flat grind instead of a taller flat grind like you see on there. Like, there are some differences about this knife, but I imagine the people who love the Malibu and who love the Mordax would actually be very, very fond of, if not love, the Cambria as well. So maybe you're like me and they snuck this one by you and you just never owned one. And I think a lot of people are going to realize that happened, and they're going to start wanting these. I know I want one now. I'd love to have one of these in my collection. It's a very fun knife, and it feels so different from either of these knives. They all feel like they're their own unique model, and it's really like all they have in common is right here. the action, or I should say the mechanism and the flipper tab. And beyond that, they're drastically different knives. And one thing as well, I know a lot of people will probably want to see a size comparison of these open, so I should probably do that too. But the Mordax, for me, was a very good size, but it wasn't a great size. the Malibu, for me and my hands, is bordering on the perfect size. And then the Cambria is interesting because it's closer, I don't know, it kind of sits right between them. You get a little more blade edge, especially with that curve there, but the handle feels slightly larger to me than the Malibu. I don't know, you're looking at them here, you tell me, but the Mordax is definitely the largest of them. So maybe that's a differentiating factor for you as well as to which one of these will work best for you. For my hands, my extra medium hands, the Malibu is the clear winner on ergos. But if my hands were a little larger, I might prefer the Mordax. And they're both fantastic, fantastic knives. I guess I should also, I apologize, I'm like rambling now and just, I don't know where I'm going with this, but if you're still watching, you're awesome. So we have 20 CV on both of these. I knew that because I've owned both of them. This one, I do not know what blade steel it is, and it does not appear to be marked, does it? Interesting. I imagine, if I had to guess, that this is probably 154 cm because of how much I know Protech used and still often uses 154 cm. So I'm going to guess it is, but I'm not sure. But yeah, both of these that you can buy today are 20 CV, which for Protech is, from what I understand, a newer thing that they're doing, that they're using that steel. And I love that they're listening to the market and to the enthusiasts and what people want, and that they're offering 20 CV on these knives, because I prefer 20 CV to 154 cm, or frankly any other steel that I'm cognizant of Protech ever using. I think it's the best steel they've used, and it's excellent. And the more that we support this happening, the more that Protech, I imagine, is going to build really good manual knives, which is good for people who, for legal reasons, can't or won't carry automatic knives, and is also good for those of us who just prefer these manual knives. This is a great thing for Protech to be in the business of, and I hope that they just keep right on going with making knives with this lock type. I'd be intrigued to see if they can do one that, rather than being a flipper with that lock, does it work to do it with a hole or a thumb stud? Or could you do a front flipper? Or like, there's a whole arena here that I think with this lock type should be played with and figured out. And so it's just really cool to see the progression and what they've accomplished so far. And I'm excited about it, if you can't tell. So anyway, this video was a little all over the place. I didn't necessarily have a direction I even meant to take this, other than just to show these three knives and kind of give my thoughts on them. And yeah, if you have any specific questions about them, or you think I need to do a video on any of them that I haven't done already, then let me know. I can make that happen. I probably will do a quasi review of the Cambria. It won't be a full like use and carry review because I'm not like hard using or carrying that knife. These two knives both already have full reviews, so you can look back and find those if you haven't watched my reviews of them already. But yeah, I do want to share my thoughts on the Cambria a little bit more individually, so you can be on the lookout for that. That'll happen soon. Thanks again to Matt, who loaned me these two knives to make this video happen. I appreciate it. He has been super kind and generous, and not only loaning me these two knives, but another one that you guys are going to see very soon. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. Let me know if you have questions down below. And again, show him some support. Matt, that is. I will link to his Instagram down below as well. Sorry, I'm not used to filming from this direction. So, down below. Anyway, this has been fun, guys. I appreciate you watching, and I will talk to you very soon.